Hollywood always sold the West as clean heroes and noble cowboys, but the truth is, some westerns were so bold, so daring, that censors tried to erase them. These weren't just dusty shootouts, they were films accused of going too far, of showing too much, or daring to question what America wanted to believe about itself. So, what happens when you mix Hollywood glamour with raw controversy? Saddle up, because the answers will surprise you, and maybe even leave you wondering how some of these films ever got released. The Outlaw, 1943/46. Few films in Western history caused as much chaos as Howard Hughes' The Outlaw. Officially, it was a story about Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett. Unofficially, everyone knew the real reason it was making headlines: Jane Russell. Hughes put the then 19-year-old actress front and center, and not for her dialogue. He promoted her with posters so provocative that city councils tried to rip them down. The Motion Picture Council of San Francisco even labeled the billboards disgusting. Hughes didn't retreat. He doubled down, using the uproar as free advertising. The film sat unreleased for years, caught between censorship boards and Catholic protests. When it finally premiered in 1943 inches San Francisco, police were literally called in to monitor theaters. A judge in Maryland even banned the film entirely, making the now famous remark that Russell's image hung like a thunderstorm over a summer landscape. Critics blasted it, moral guardians condemned it, but the public? They lined up around the block. By the time the film got a wide release in 1946, Jane Russell was a household name. Howard Hughes himself even claimed he designed a special bra to enhance Russell's look. She later laughed it off, saying it was so uncomfortable she refused to wear it. But the stunt worked. Hughes didn't just launch a movie, he launched a star. The Outlaw wasn't remembered for its plot or its gunfights, but for the way it turned a censorship battle into a marketing triumph. Duel in the Sun, 1946. If The Outlaw was Hughes' chaos, Duel in the Sun was David O. Selznick's scandal. Nicknamed Lust in the Dust, it was one of the steamiest westerns ever made in its time, and censors scrambled to chop it down. The story followed Pearl Chavez, played by Jennifer Jones, a mixed-heritage orphan sent to live with distant relatives. What followed was a melodrama, filled with betrayal, jealousy, and obsession. Gregory Peck, usually cast as the noble leading man, shocked audiences by playing a dangerous rancher who mistreated Pearl in scenes that left critics squirming. Even before its release, the Production Code Office flagged it for immorality. Catholic groups staged protests, and certain states outright banned it. To get it into theaters at all, Selznick was forced to cut entire reels, softening the most heated moments. And yet, the trimmed version still rattled audiences. It was messy, dramatic, and relentlessly uncomfortable. But the controversy turned it into an event. People flocked to see what the fuss was about. Critics were divided. Some called it trash. Others praised its ambition. But the ending, where Pearl and Peck's character collapsed together in the desert, cemented its reputation as a fever dream western. Duel in the Sun proved that pushing boundaries could both outrage and attract audiences. In fact, its notoriety helped pave the way for later melodramatic westerns that weren't afraid to blend passion with frontier violence. Love it or hate it, Selznick's gamble became part of Hollywood legend. The last movie, 1971. Dennis Hopper was riding high after Easy Rider, and Hollywood handed him the keys to make whatever he wanted. What he delivered was The Last Movie, a surreal western that baffled critics and terrified studio executives. Shot in Peru, the film followed a stuntman who stays behind after a western production leaves, only to watch locals begin reenacting movie violence as if it were real. The movie blurred fantasy and reality so aggressively that audiences didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't just confusing, it was accused of being reckless. Scenes of chaotic violence, mixed with experimental editing, gave it the reputation of an unfilmable project. Universal Pictures barely released it, and when it did, theaters in several countries refused to screen it. Critics called it indulgent and even dangerous. And within weeks, it disappeared from circulation. Hopper himself admitted later that he was lost in the chaos of making it. But years later, directors like Quentin Tarantino and Alejandro Jodorowsky praised it as a visionary experiment. Its controversy kept it alive in cult circles, where fans sought it out precisely because it had been suppressed. The last movie wasn't just controversial. It was career-ending. Hopper didn't direct another major film for nearly a decade. For some, it's a cautionary tale about too much freedom. For others, it's proof that sometimes the most interesting westerns are the ones that almost vanished. A Man Called Horse, 1970. Richard Harris wasn't the first person you'd expect to see hanging from ropes in a Sioux initiation ritual. But that's exactly what A Man Called Horse delivered, and it shocked everyone. The film followed Harris as an English aristocrat captured by native warriors who eventually adopts their way of life. At its heart, it wanted to show respect. But critics and activists quickly saw it differently. Native groups blasted the film for stereotyping and inventing ceremonies that had no basis in reality. The American Indian movement staged boycotts. In Minneapolis, protesters literally blocked theater doors to stop audiences from entering. Even those who weren't native accused the film of turning Harris into a white savior in feathers. The backlash didn't stop people from buying tickets. The film grossed millions, sparking 2 sequels. But the controversy deepened with each installment. By the third film, which ignored humane guidelines, real horses reportedly died on set, sparking international condemnation. And yet, for all the uproar, Harris defended the project. He claimed it gave audiences a glimpse into pre-colonial life. Whether you see it as pioneering or problematic, A Man Called Horse remains one of the most talked about westerns of its era. It was proof that even in the 1,970 seconds, Hollywood could provoke massive cultural battles with just one movie. 5 Savage Men, 1,970. Some westerns pushed the limits of taste, and 5 Savage Men pushed harder than most. This was no polished John Wayne adventure. It was grim, raw, and brutal. The story began with a stagecoach ambush in the Arizona desert. A young woman is left in the hands of violent outlaws, and her survival depends on teaming up with an Apache warrior, played by Henry Silva, to get revenge. Unlike later revenge westerns, this film was stripped of any glamour. It leaned into cruelty, painting a world that was as disturbing as it was relentless. Critics called it exploitation, dressed in cowboy boots. Even lead actress Michelle Carey was rumored to regret signing on, having worked with legends like John Wayne and Elvis before being dragged into this grim project. What set it apart was the way it left audiences unsettled. Unlike stylish revenge tales that came later, 5 Savage Men offered no relief, no charm, no larger-than-life hero to cheer for. Just pain and payback. And for many, that was too much. Some theaters refused to screen it, and others buried it in late-night slots. Today, it stands as one of the harshest westerns of its time. Controversial then, largely forgotten now, but unforgettable to anyone who's ever sat through its unflinching cruelty. In a genre built on myths of justice, 5 Savage Men showed what happens when justice itself turns ugly. Navajo Joe, 1966. Before Burt Reynolds was a superstar, he made a western he later called the worst experience of his life. Navajo Joe. On paper, it sounded like a decent revenge story. A native warrior hunts down the raiders who destroyed his village. But in execution, it became one of the most awkwardly handled westerns ever filmed. The problem started with casting. Reynolds, who wasn't native, was put in the lead role, complete with a dark wig and bronzed makeup. Even he admitted it looked absurd. Years later, he joked the costume made him look like he was wearing a slingshot outfit. The production was plagued with confusion. Director Sergio Corbucci thought he was getting Marlon Brando. Reynolds thought he was signing onto a film directed by Sergio Leone. Neither man got what he expected. When the movie hit theaters, European critics slammed it for poor taste, and American distributors didn't know what to do with it. Some theaters refused to screen it altogether, and the few that did often buried it under double features. Reynolds himself disowned it, claiming it was so bad it only played in places where people couldn't leave. And yet, the movie refused to disappear. Quentin Tarantino later praised its soundtrack, even using Ennio Morricone's score in Kill Bill. Cult audiences dug it up as one of those so bad it's fascinating films. Still, it remains a cautionary tale. A controversial Western remembered not for what it tried to say, but for how badly it missed the mark. Django, 1966. When Django first hit screens in Italy, it was so violent for its time that entire countries banned it outright. Franco Nero played the now iconic drifter, dragging a coffin behind him through the mud. Inside wasn't a body. It was a Gatling gun. The image alone was shocking, but the carnage that followed made it infamous. The body count was higher than almost any Western before it. Shootouts weren't quick and clean. They were muddy, bloody, and relentless. For 1,966 audiences used to clean-cut cowboys, this was a revelation and a nightmare. The Italian censors slapped it with an 18+ rating, one of the harshest at the time. In the U.S., distributors hesitated to even touch it. The result was years of underground screenings and whispered recommendations. Of course, the controversy only made it bigger. By the time Tarantino released Django Unchained, the original had become a cult legend. Its influence spread far beyond Italy, shaping the darker side of the spaghetti western genre. Dozens of unofficial sequels popped up, each trying to cash in on the name, though none matched the raw punch of the original. Django may have been condemned as excessive, but it carved a permanent place in film history. It showed that westerns didn't have to be noble. They could be grim, dirty, and dangerous. And in doing so, it inspired a generation of filmmakers who weren't afraid to push the limits of violence on screen. Ride the Whirlwind, 1966. Jack Nicholson isn't the first name people think of when they hear Western, but Ride the Whirlwind proved he had more range than most gave him credit for. This wasn't a flashy Hollywood shoot, up. It was a quiet, bleak, anti-Western where nothing went right. And that's exactly why it sparked controversy. Nicholson not only starred in it, he wrote the script. The story followed a group of cowboys mistaken for outlaws and hunted down by a posse. Simple on the surface, but the tone was relentlessly grim. There were no heroes, no clear villains, just men trapped in a cycle of fear and violence they couldn't escape. In Spain, under Francisco Franco's censorship, the film was outright banned. Authorities claimed it portrayed law enforcement as corrupt and untrustworthy, something they wouldn't allow on screen. Even outside Spain, distributors didn't know how to market it. Audiences expecting action and gunfights got a slow-burn tragedy instead. Some critics praised its realism, but others dismissed it as pointless misery. Over time, though, Ride the Whirlwind gained a reputation as one of the most honest portrayals of life in the Old West. It was stripped of glamour and full of quiet dread, showing how quickly ordinary men could be destroyed by suspicion and circumstance. For Nicholson, it was proof he wasn't just a face, he was a writer willing to take risks. Today, it's considered a cult gem, but its ban in Spain cemented its place as one of the most controversial westerns of the 1,960 seconds. Heaven's Gate, 1,980. No Western collapsed harder on release than Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. It was supposed to be an epic. Instead, it became a disaster so huge that it nearly bankrupted a studio and got yanked from theaters within a week. But the real controversy wasn't just its length, it was what happened behind the scenes. Reports came out that animals were harmed during production, sparking outrage from humane groups. Critics who saw the first cut didn't hold back. They called it bloated, confusing, even irresponsible. The initial release ran over 3 hours, and audiences simply walked out. United Artists, the studio behind it, pulled the film in panic. For years, Heaven's Gate was a punchline, remembered only as a symbol of Hollywood excess. But slowly, a reevaluation began. Directors and critics started to see the ambition in Cimino's vision. Restored versions revealed sweeping cinematography and bold storytelling that had been buried under bad press. Today, some even call it a misunderstood masterpiece. Still, the controversy never left it. The stories of on-set chaos, ballooning budgets, and early bans stuck. Heaven's Gate didn't just fail. It reshaped the industry. Studios tightened budgets, reined in directors, and stopped giving filmmakers unchecked control. One film's downfall ended an era of Hollywood freedom. In the end, Heaven's Gate earned its place on this list, not just because it was pulled from theaters, but because its ripple effects changed how movies were made forever.